The ballroom shimmered with wealth, champagne flowing, diamonds glittering, and cameras flashing as billionaires and socialites arrived one by one. Grant Remington, tech mogul and the night's most anticipated guest, stepped into the gala with practiced ease, his name already echoing through the press. But as his eyes scanned the crowd, he froze. Near the staff entrance stood a woman in faded clothes, clutching a child while two more clung to her legs. Her eyes met his. Sophie, his ex, homeless, with triplets, his triplets. The glass slipped from his hand. The past he buried had just walked into his perfect life. Grant didn't remember dropping the champagne glass, only the sharp crack of crystal against marble and the collective gasp of nearby guests. But his eyes were locked on her, Sophie Langston. His Sophie, except she looked nothing like the vibrant woman who used to bring fire into his otherwise orderly world. Her clothes were simple, a size too big, her hair hastily pulled back. Her face was thinner now, marked with exhaustion, but her posture remained tall, proud. In her arms she held a toddler, and two more clung to either side of her coat, little replicas of a man they had never met. Grant's heart thundered. He couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The lights of the gala dimmed for a presentation, but Grant stood rooted in place. Flashes of memory surged. Sophie curled on his couch in their tiny Brooklyn apartment, laughing at his terrible jokes. Their last fight, when he begged her to come to Palo Alto with him, to follow the dream together. She refused. Her community work was everything to her, and he couldn't understand it then. He left angry, proud, and she never chased him. He convinced himself she had moved on. Now here she was, at a gala she clearly didn't belong at, holding his children. By the time he regained control of his limbs, Sophie had already turned and was ushering the children toward the catering hallway, disappearing into the staff corridor. Instinct took over. Grant pushed past startled attendees, ignoring whispered questions from reporters, his expensive shoes clicking against the marble as he chased a life he thought was gone forever. When he turned the corner, he saw her pausing in front of a door marked employees only, her body tense. "Sophie," he said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. She stiffened but didn't turn. "Sophie, please." She looked over her shoulder, her eyes stormy. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. Grant took a step forward, hands raised. "I didn't know about them, about you." She held the toddler tighter as the other two stared up at Grant, their matching brown eyes identical to his own when he looked in the mirror. "Are they?" he asked, unable to finish the sentence. Sophie hesitated, then nodded once. "Yes, they're yours, triplets." The air left his lungs. Triplets. He swayed slightly, bracing himself on the wall as the children watched silently. "Can we talk?" he asked, almost pleading. Sophie looked at him for a long moment, then motioned him into the storage room behind the kitchen. The room was cramped, lined with shelves of serving trays and crates of unopened wine. She laid down a thin blanket from her bag, pulled out some worn plastic toys, and set the children down gently. The toddlers, all around 4 years old, settled in without a fuss, as if they were used to hiding behind the scenes while the world moved without them. Grant crouched, his $10,000 suit creasing on the dusty tile floor, eyes locked on the 3 tiny faces. He didn't speak until he was sure his voice wouldn't crack. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sophie didn't answer right away. She unpacked crackers from her bag and handed them to the boys, murmuring soft encouragement. Only then did she look up. "I tried," she said flatly. "I sent letters, 3 of them. All were returned. I called your company. They said you didn't take personal messages." Grant opened his mouth, stunned. "My assistant must have filtered them. I changed everything when I moved." She nodded. "I noticed." Her voice was calm but cold. "By the time I realized I was pregnant, you were unreachable, and then I got sick, pre-eclampsia. I was in and out of the hospital. After they were born, I had no money left. I lost my job, my apartment. We spent months living in shelters." Her words struck like hammers. Grant had spent those same months flying private jets to investor conferences, gracing Forbes covers, and giving TED talks about innovation. The children giggled at something on their toy phone, completely unaware of the tension filling the room. He stared at them, guilt rising like bile. "You went through all that, alone?" he whispered. Sophie's expression didn't soften. "Yes, but I survived. We survived." She tucked a curl behind one boy's ear. "They're healthy, they're kind, and they're all I've had." Grant knelt beside the blanket, reaching out slowly. One of the boys looked up at him, curious. "Hi," he said softly. "I'm Grant." The child grinned. "Hi, Gwant," he repeated, mispronouncing it adorably. Sophie watched silently as Grant's hand trembled in midair. "What are their names?" he asked. "Illy." She pointed to the one with the toy phone. "Malik, the one gnawing on a cracker." "And this is Noah." The child in her arms blinked at him sleepily. Grant swallowed. "Noah?" he repeated. "That's my middle name." Sophie nodded. "I remembered." They sat in silence for a moment, broken only by the innocent chatter of the children. Grant finally looked up. "Let me help, please. I'll do anything." Sophie's jaw tensed. "I don't want your guilt or your charity. We're okay. I'm working at a food co-op now. They gave me this catering shift as a bonus. I'm managing." He nodded, trying not to look at the cheap diaper bag, the patched jacket, the tired circles under her eyes. "But it doesn't have to be this hard," he said. "They deserve more, you do." "I don't need you to rescue me, Grant," she said, her voice tight. "You left me once to chase your dreams. Now you want to show up with money and fix everything." "No," he said quickly, "not with money. I want to be their father, not just legally, actually, in their lives, every day." Sophie looked away, blinking fast. "They don't know who you are. I didn't know if you'd want them, if you'd be angry." "I'm not angry," he said gently. "I'm overwhelmed and heartbroken, but never angry." Malik toddled toward him, holding a toy. Grant hesitated, then accepted it with shaking hands. Sophie stood slowly, cradling Noah as Illy leaned against her hip. "I need to finish this shift," she said. "We need the paycheck and the leftovers." Grant stood too. "Let me drive you home afterward. Just talk. No pressure." She studied him, searching his eyes for something real. Finally, she nodded once. "Okay, but no chauffeur, no cameras, just you, just me," he promised. That night, he followed her home in his own car, parking across the street from a two-story building above a hardware store. The stairs creaked as they climbed to a tiny apartment that smelled faintly of baby powder and cheap detergent. It was clean but small, cramped with second-hand furniture and toys. Still, it was filled with love. Grant knelt on the rug, helping Illy stack blocks while Sophie fed the others. He offered to help wash dishes, and when one boy spilled juice, Grant cleaned it without flinching. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful or rich. He felt useful. They talked late into the night, about the years they lost, the sacrifices she made, the ones he didn't know he owed. He learned about Sophie's volunteer work with women's shelters, about the times she went hungry so the boys could eat, about how she still wrote poetry when they slept. He shared how empty his success felt lately, how he went to bed every night feeling something was missing. "It was them," he said quietly, "and you." When he left, the boys were asleep, and Sophie stood in the doorway, arms crossed but not cold. "I don't know what this means," she admitted. "You can't just walk in and fix it with bedtime stories." "I know," he said. "But I'll be back, tomorrow and the next day, as long as you'll let me." She gave a small nod. "We'll see." And he did come back, the next day and the day after. He showed up with groceries, but let her cook. He painted one wall of the boys' bedroom and built them a bookshelf with his own hands, scratching his Rolex in the process. The boys grew used to his face, his laugh, his voice reading bedtime stories. One evening, as he tucked them in, Malik whispered, "I love you, Daddy," and Grant's heart broke open. For the first time in years, Grant Remington's mornings didn't begin with back investor calls or headlines about market shares. They started with the sound of 3 tiny pairs of feet charging toward him, one child climbing onto his chest, another stuffing a plush bear into his face, and the third yelling, "Pancakes." as if it were the greatest word ever invented. He found himself smiling before he even opened his eyes. Sophie often watched from the doorway, arms crossed but unable to hide the faint curve of her lips. She didn't say much, not yet, but her silence wasn't hostile. It was watchful, cautious, layered with old pain and new wonder. At the office, the change didn't go unnoticed. Grant began declining high-profile events. He cut his hours in half and pushed off a lucrative partnership deal with a global retailer. He had always cared about his company, but suddenly, numbers weren't the only thing that kept him up at night. One afternoon, after spending 3 hours at a small indoor playground with the triplets, covered in juice, glitter, and exhaustion, he stood outside Sophie's apartment with them fast asleep in the back seat of his Range Rover. He texted her, "Take your time, we're outside." She appeared at the door a few minutes later, wearing sweatpants and slippers, hair tied in a loose braid, her eyes puffy from a rare nap. "You look like hell," she teased. "And I feel like heaven," he replied. She didn't laugh, not out loud, but her mouth twitched. Then came the inevitable. The media found out. It started with a single blurry photo. Grant crouched beside one of the triplets at a farmer's market, holding out a piece of fruit. A gossip blog posted it with the caption, "Billionaire's Secret Family." Within hours, every entertainment outlet ran with it. Reporters swarmed the co-op where Sophie worked. Drones hovered outside her window. Paparazzi staked out daycare centers and grocery stores. Sophie was blindsided. One morning, she opened her front door and found 3 camera crews standing on the curb. She slammed it shut. By the time Grant arrived, she was pacing with Noah on her hip, tears in her eyes, fury in her voice. "You said this wouldn't happen," she snapped. "I said I'd protect you," he corrected, gently taking Noah from her arms. "And I will." She exhaled, defeated. "I didn't sign up for this. The boys didn't either." "I know," he said softly. "Let me fix it, can you?" she asked. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said yes. That night, Grant called an emergency meeting with his publicist, legal team, and security detail. He canceled all public appearances and ordered extra security outside Sophie's building. But even with physical barriers, the scrutiny deepened. Tabloids began digging. Old neighbors were interviewed. Headlines screamed accusations. She trapped him, from shelter to Billionaire's baby mama. Sophie saw them. She never said a word, but he knew. The way her shoulders sagged, the way her voice grew quieter, the way she started pulling away from him emotionally, inch by inch. One night, she called him from the bathroom. "The boys were crying," she said shakily. "They heard people yelling outside. One of them shouted my name. I think I need to leave town." "No," he said instantly. "Come stay with me. The estate is private, gated, safe. I can't move into your mansion like a kept woman. You wouldn't be." He said, "You'd be the mother of my children, a woman I care about deeply, someone I owe more than 1,000 lifetimes could repay." Sophie went silent. That weekend, she packed 3 bags filled with essentials and favorite toys. Grant stood in the driveway of his oceanfront estate as she pulled up in her beat-up minivan. The house loomed behind him, grand and modern, but he looked nervous, almost boyish. "This is temporary," she reminded him as she stepped out. "Only if you want it to be," he replied. The estate was vast but warm. He had a nursery wing prepared. 3 beds, stuffed animals, painted murals of animals, even a handmade rocking chair carved with each child's name. She didn't ask how he knew their favorite colors, their quirks, or that Malik liked to sleep with 2 blankets. But deep down, she knew he had been paying attention. Things quieted for a time. Inside those walls, they found peace. The boys thrived. Sophie relaxed, even laughed again. Some nights Grant cooked. Badly. She taught him how to fold laundry without turning everything pink. They started taking walks along the beach. The boys called him Dada, without hesitation. But still, Sophie hadn't said the one thing Grant needed to hear, that she forgave him. Then the storm came. Grant's brother, Dean Remington, flew in from New York. Unlike Grant, Dean had never stepped away from the family's ruthless business empire. He wore expensive suits like armor and wielded PR like a weapon. He showed up uninvited, marching into Grant's living room with news. "The board is concerned," Dean announced. "They're worried you've gone soft, skipping meetings, letting this scandal spiral." Grant's jaw tightened. "They're not my concern anymore." Dean tossed a manila folder on the coffee table. Inside were clippings of every headline, negative press, sinking stock projections, rumors of investors pulling out. "You built something bigger than this family mess," Dean hissed. "Don't throw it away over a woman who was homeless last year." Before Grant could respond, Sophie walked in carrying Noah. She had heard everything. She didn't say a word. She looked at Grant, then at Dean, then turned and left the room. After Dean was gone, Grant found her sitting by the nursery window, staring out at the gray ocean. Her arms were wrapped tightly around herself. "I heard him," she said softly. "He said I'm the reason your company is falling apart. You're not. But you could lose everything." She whispered, "I don't care. You should." "I only care about one thing right now," he said, kneeling beside her. "Us?" She looked at him then, her guard lowered, her eyes full of uncertainty. "Do you mean that? With everything I am?" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed, worn. She handed it to him. He opened it slowly. It was the letter she had written 4 years ago. The one that had been returned to her. It read, "I'm scared. I don't know what to do. But they're yours, Grant, all 3. And I still love you even if I shouldn't." He read it twice. Then he looked up. "You still love me?" he asked. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I tried not to." He leaned in, kissed her gently. The silence between them dissolved, and then he said the words he had rehearsed in his heart for months. "Marry me?" Sophie didn't answer his proposal right away. Her breath hitched, eyes glistening as the weight of those 2 words, "marry me," hung in the air like a fragile dream. For a moment the house fell into complete silence. The ocean waves murmured in the distance through the nursery windows, and the soft hum of the baby monitor echoed through the hallway. Grant remained kneeling, not with the arrogance of a man used to getting his way, but as someone stripped bare, offering what little he had left that wasn't forged by money or power. His sincerity, "I don't know," she finally whispered. "I've spent years building a life without you. I had to learn how to survive on my own, how to be mother and father, how to be brave when I was terrified. Now you're here, and everything's changing so fast. I don't know if I'm ready to believe that it'll last." Grant gently took her hand, resting it over his heart. "It won't be perfect, Sophie. I can't promise there won't be days we're overwhelmed or confused or exhausted. But I can promise I won't run, not again. I will never choose ambition over you, or them." He glanced down the hallway where he could hear the faint murmuring of one of the boys stirring in his sleep. "This is what I've been looking for my whole life. I just didn't know it until I almost lost it." She lowered her eyes, still torn, her heart a battlefield between old wounds and new hopes. "I need time," she said, "and I need to know you won't disappear the moment things get hard. I'm not asking you to say yes tonight," he said softly. "Just don't say no, not yet." Sophie nodded slowly, and that was enough. The next few weeks passed in a blur of gentle compromise and quiet transformation. The children quickly adapted to their new environment, endless space to run, a backyard full of sunshine and secrets, a father who tucked them in at night and kissed their scraped knees in the morning. Grant's life became a mosaic of new habits, waking up early to make breakfast, burned waffles included, reading bedtime stories he didn't understand but loved anyway, learning the rhythm of naps, tantrums, and toothbrushing with cartoon-themed paste. Sophie remained cautious, never taking anything for granted. She didn't allow Grant to shower her with gifts. Instead, they took family outings to libraries and public parks, feeding ducks and collecting leaves. Grant had never imagined that his happiest moments wouldn't be inside boardrooms or penthouse lounges, but pushing a stroller down a cobbled path with one child asleep on his shoulder and another humming a made-up song beside him. Still, beneath the warmth, tensions lingered. Grant's business partners were growing restless. Stockholders demanded explanations. Despite his public silence, the gossip continued to swirl, now speculating about a secret wedding, hidden children, and corporate instability. One of his senior executives even suggested that he clarify the narrative before further damage was done. But Grant refused to reduce his family to a branding strategy. Instead, he began planning something else, something bold, honest, and public, not to fix his image, but to tell the truth. One night, while Sophie bathed the boys, Grant sat in his home office, recording a video with no script, no makeup, no staged lighting, just himself, raw and exposed. "I've spent years building companies, chasing prestige, convincing the world I was invincible, but I wasn't. I was lonely, and I walked away from the one person who made me feel whole because I was scared to slow down. In doing that, I missed the birth of my children. I missed the moment they took their first breath, said their first words, took their first steps. I missed the family I didn't know I already had. That's a loss I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. But now that I've found them again, I'm not losing them twice." He ended the recording with a single sentence. "I'm not a perfect man, but I'm becoming a present father." The video went viral overnight. Thousands of comments poured in, some skeptical, many emotional, others sharing similar experiences of reconnection and regret. Grant didn't care about approval. He had spoken his truth, and Sophie saw it. She watched the entire video alone in the bedroom, silent tears trailing down her cheeks. Not because of the words, but because of the way he looked at the camera, with the same open vulnerability he used to show only to her. He didn't ask her again about marriage, not that week, not even the next. Instead, he let his actions speak. When Ellie had a fever at 2 in the morning, Grant was the one to sit by his bed all night with a cool cloth. When Malik refused to eat vegetables, Grant turned it into a spaceship game that had the boys laughing until they choked on broccoli. When Noah got scared of thunder, Grant held him through the storm without saying a word. Sophie watched all of it, every quiet act, every soft word, every moment of unspoken love. Then, one crisp afternoon in late autumn, she came into the kitchen where Grant stood, flour covering his sleeves, trying, and failing, to bake pumpkin muffins. She held something in her hand, a small velvet box. Grant turned, surprised. "What's that?" Sophie opened the box slowly. Inside was a simple silver ring, engraved with the initials of all 3 boys. "I never needed a mansion," she said, her voice trembling. "I never needed diamonds or declarations. I just needed this, to know you'd show up, that you'd stay." She looked him in the eye. "I'm ready now, if you still are." He didn't answer. He just pulled her into his arms and kissed her like a man who had finally come home. Their wedding was nothing like the gala where he first saw her again. It was held in the backyard beneath a canopy of fairy lights, with picnic benches and mason jars, Sophie wearing a simple cream dress, barefoot in the grass. The triplets wore matching suspenders and bow ties, and danced with juice boxes in their hands. Only close friends and family were invited. The press was not. And yet, somehow, it was the most beautiful celebration Grant had ever witnessed, not because of the setting, but because of the life they had built through struggle, sacrifice, and second chances. After the wedding, they made small changes together. Sophie kept her job at the co-op, working part-time to stay connected to the community she still fiercely loved. Grant shifted his focus from profit to purpose, restructuring parts of his company to create programs for single mothers, transitional housing, and early childhood education. They became partners in more than name. In the mornings, they walked their boys to preschool hand in hand. In the evenings, they cooked together in a kitchen that often echoed with both music and chaos. They had arguments, tired days, and the occasional cold silence, but now they always returned to each other, and though neither of them said it often, their love had grown stronger than it had ever been in their youth. Because this time it was rooted in truth, in real life, in resilience. Sometimes, late at night, Grant would watch the triplets sleeping in their shared room, their little bodies curled into blankets, their dreams peaceful. He would remember the moment he saw them for the first time, half hidden at the edge of a glittering ballroom where his world had flipped in a single breath. He had come to that gala seeking prestige and applause. He left with something far more valuable, a family. Years later, the whispers of that first gala night had faded into history, replaced by the steady hum of a life fully lived. Grant and Sophie now walked through their days not as symbols of scandal or headlines, but as partners, imperfect, grounded, and deeply in love. Their sons, once small enough to fit in his arms all at once, had grown into curious, vibrant boys who asked endless questions and fought over cereal brands and bedtime songs. Their home, once just an estate of cold marble and echoing halls, had transformed into a sanctuary filled with finger paintings, forts made of couch cushions, and laughter that never quite died down. Sometimes Grant would sit on the porch steps just before sunset, watching his family play in the yard, Sophie chasing the boys with a water hose, all of them shrieking in joy, and he would feel that quiet, full ache in his chest. The kind that only comes when you almost lost something and got it back. Not by force, not by money, but by showing up again and again, until the people you love start to believe that maybe this time you mean it. He often thought back to that night, the sight of her in that gala, worn clothes, tired eyes, holding a child in her arms. He realized now that fate hadn't cursed him with a scandal. It had given him a second chance. A door he hadn't even known he needed to open, and by stepping through it, he hadn't just found his children, he found himself. In the end, Grant Remington didn't need the world's approval or another $1 billion deal. He just needed to hear 3 small voices call him Dad, and one woman's voice whisper, "I'm glad you came back," and that was everything.